All right. Thank you, Ricky and Lori and the State Board of Accounts for inviting our office here at your guys' annual conference. And I will say, you guys are a rowdy bunch. I'm sitting up here in the front, and all of a sudden I hear everybody yelling out bingo numbers. I'm like, did I come to the right conference, or what's going on here? So, and before we get started, I know I only got 30 minutes, and I have a lot of information to share with you guys. I know the PowerPoints have been offered to you guys and provided beforehand, but is there anybody here representing Decatur County by a raise of hands? Okay, I've got to ask, is the grandma on demand a legitimate thing? Do you know what I'm talking about? You have any idea what I'm talking about? Grandparents on demand, cash incentive for moving to Decatur County? Really? That's a real thing, huh? Okay, my brother lives in Greensburg, and he hasn't mentioned anything to me about that. So, just curious. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. My name is Todd Jennings. I'm with NDOT Office of Transit. I'm going to kind of explain our program, what we manage on a federal level, state level, and hopefully give you guys a little bit of an idea of how we operate and what we're responsible for. So NDOT Office of Transit is part of NDOT's multimodal division, and multimodal is made up of transportation, aviation, rail, and freight. And you can see there by the slide, the section of our office that I'm going to primarily emphasize today is the 5311 program. And just by a raise of hands, just out of curiosity, before you were provided the PowerPoint prior to the presentation today, by a raise of hands, if I would have came up here this afternoon and said, what do I mean when I reference the 5311 program? By a raise of hands, how many could give me a brief explanation of what they think that program entails, just by a raise of hands? Raise them high so I can see. Like 3 or 4 of you. All right. So I'm going to give you guys a surface level introduction to the 5311 program and what some of you are currently or should be seeing come through your offices as far as grant funds, what those funds are used for, and the like. So some of you here today, your county commissioners are not in any type of contract with the state for any federal funds. The funds that I'm going to identify here in a few minutes, but some of you guys, although you're not in a pass-through agreement or in a contract to receive those funds, your county may be receiving public transportation through another county's contract and receipt of these funds. So the 5311 program is what I'm going to emphasize this morning or this afternoon. We're in a contract also with RLS and Associates. They're just a transit consulting firm that we obtain technical assistance and other resources from to help manage the federal program. So the primary purpose, the 5311 program, what am I referring to? The 5311 program are the federal funds that the state receives each year on an annual basis from the Federal Transit Administration. That is the federal entity that oversees our office. And we receive federal funds every year through a formula allocation for the provision of rural public transportation. So areas throughout the state of Indiana that have been categorized through the census as a rural area, 50,000 or less in population, they are eligible to receive 5311 funding for the provision of rural transit. There's a 50% local match requirement, and we receive anywhere from about $14.5 to $16 million annually from FTA to spread across the program. And I'm going to kind of give you guys an idea what our program looks like here in a second. That's the amount that we receive to spread across the entire program annually. We also receive state public mass transit funds, better known as PMTF. We receive those funds that are approved in the biennial state budget. We receive approximately $5 to $6 million for our 5311 program. The state PMTF funds are awarded across the board statewide for both rural and urban transit systems. So your large urban systems, your fixed route like Indigo, Fort Wayne Transit, Gary Transit, they all receive the state funds as well. But there's 4 different groups. I'm not going to go into detail about the groups, but there's 4 groups of public transit within the state that receive PMTF funds, and we're categorized in Group 4, which is the Rural Transit Program. And like I said, we receive about $5 to $6 million every year to help support transit. And every single one of our rural transit systems, they use the PMTF state funding to help meet the 50% federal match requirement of the federal funds. So who is eligible to receive 5311 rural transit funding? Cities who normally receive those funds directly, they operate the transit system directly from the city. Counties, which for the most part, that's the large portion of our program, is counties who receive those funds and then pass those funds through to the transit agency. Regional planning or economic development districts are also eligible, and they operate the same way as counties, where they receive the funds and they pass those funds through to a local nonprofit who provides the transit service. And then in contingency situations, where we've had one situation over the last 20 years in the program where we had to direct fund a nonprofit agency to provide transportation, and that's because there was a planning commission that decided one day that they didn't want to be in the public transit business anymore. So we had to fund a local nonprofit directly for a year until we could identify another entity that would act as a pass-through. Applications are made available usually every March. They're due end of May, beginning of June timeframe. Currently, the applications are not available to new recipients, and not to go into great detail about that, but our program is looking at going into a large transition over the next 4 to 5 years, possibly even longer than that, where we move to a more regional model of service, and I'll explain what that looks like here in a second. But right now we've got 42, or should I say going into 22, 41 recipients of these funds, and we're going to do more of a regional model where we start kind of partnering up or coordinating single recipients with each other so we get a more regional model of service, and I'll go more into that here in a second. So how are funds awarded each year? So each year when the applications are submitted, we go through and we plug in some operating and financial data into a formula. It mirrors FTA's formula allocation to the states. The information that goes into that formula is the population data based on the decennial census, and we're still waiting on the 2020 census data to be published so we can update those populations. Passenger boardings are part of that formula, and then locally derived income, otherwise known as LDI, in the program, and you can see the different sources of local funds there that go into the formula as well. And then part of the formula distribution or award of the funds each year, we have a discretionary element, and we base that discretion on how we move or adjust funds around after we plug in the formula and it spits out what each county is going to get or each recipient is going to receive. Then we can go in based on compliance, ongoing compliance, performance levels, and if we feel like there's a system or a recipient that's performing above and beyond, we like to try to award those systems. So we have a little bit of a discretionary element as well that plays into the formula allocation each year. And that little statement there in red, COVID-19 kind of impacted the data that we put in for the 2021 data. So FTA allowed us, and it's 3-year rolling data that goes into that formula. So they allowed us to use 2019 twice because that was the last year of just normal service levels before COVID hit. So that's a basic overview of how the funds are awarded each year. I'm not going to go through every single one of these little charts here, but this is a timeline of basic grant approval, grant application submittal approval, contract execution, and then by the time we get through usually around November, December each year, that's when we've got contracts signed locally through the state signature process, and then those contracts get fully executed, go out to the grant recipients, and then the transit agencies are ready to submit their first claim for reimbursement for any funds awarded in April. Systems submit quarterly claims to NDOT to be reimbursed. So we like to have those contracts ready to go before time for them to submit their first claim. So this is a kind of a screenshot of our program right now. In 2022, based on the applications we got in, as well as some transition of some grant recipients that we're going to transition out of the program. Those are identified by the 3 big red X's on the map. I don't know if anybody here today is representing Johnson, Hancock, or Hamilton County, but the public transportation systems that have historically received the rural transit, the federal funds for rural transportation, are being transitioned out of the program because we've identified that they are actually operating within Indianapolis's urbanized area. So they should actually be receiving 5307 funds directly from FTA in order to provide that transportation service. So over the last 2 years, those 3 counties have been slowly transitioning out of our program, and they're going to receive those urban funds, and they're going to be under the umbrella of Indigo, actually. So come December 31st, those 3 counties aren't going to be in our program anymore. But that kind of gives you an overview of what our program looks like. We've got 41 recipients, 26 operate as single county transit systems, 8 of which are multi-county systems, which is more along the lines of the regional model that we want to establish long term. Our largest regional or multi-county system is down in the toe of the state. It's Southern Indiana Development Commission. They receive the funds, pass those funds through to a local nonprofit called 4 Rivers, and then 4 Rivers operates the service over a 10-county service area. And then we've got a handful of other multi-county systems throughout the state operate in 3 or 4 other counties, but for the most part, all of our recipients operate as a single county service. Yep, go ahead. Got a question?
What does the yellow X on Hendricks County?
Good question. So Hendricks County is actually another county that, are you guys from Hendricks County? Okay. Hendricks County is another system that we've identified as well. They're operating, a large portion of Hendricks County falls within the urbanized area of Indianapolis, but they've decided that because they also, Morgan County is part of that contract, so they're going to actually be what's categorized as a joint recipient. They're going to receive both 5311 and 5307 to provide service. So they're not completely out. They're kind of just partially red. So that's why it's like that. But good question. So we've got about 72% of the state covered with rural public transportation. The goal long term is to have the entire state covered, and that's more along the lines of why we're going to regional models. Yep, go ahead. As far as the 5311 funds that were going to those 3 counties, yeah, it just gets distributed across the entire program. So the funds that they would have normally received are going to get split up and allocated to the entirety of the program. Yep, good question. All right, so compliance. We've got a room full of county auditors, so this is kind of more in the realm of your ballpark of what you should be concerned about. So compliance, how do we monitor? We've got a new grant management software that we procured about 3 years ago. It has greatly improved the manner by which we manage the program. We actually met with Ricky and Lori and State Board of Accounts a couple times over the last year, and we've given their office actually access to that grant management system. Which, have you guys had any issues with that, by the way? Anybody? Okay. So anyway. One of the things that we would recommend is if your county is in a pass-through agreement with a local nonprofit to provide transportation, I would highly recommend that you contact your transit agency, the agency director there, and see if you guys can obtain access to this grant management system. Because as county auditors, especially again going back to if you're in a pass-through agreement for the provision of transportation, receiving these federal funds, there is oversight responsibility that you have, and we're going to get into the meat of that here in a minute. But I would highly recommend that you contact the transit agency and see about obtaining access to that system. And then if you need further assistance with that, you can contact me specifically, and I can get you guys acclimated with the system. So basically what we do, our systems are scheduled for compliance reviews every 4 years. They're on a rotating basis because, as I mentioned, we've got 41 subrecipients going into 2022. So we split those up We usually conduct anywhere from a dozen to 14, 15 reviews a year. We do it through this system now. It usually operates just like any compliance review or any type of audit would be conducted. Notify the system beforehand. They usually upload some documents so we can review them before we actually conduct the on-site visit. Any findings that are identified, we create corrective action plans, and then they submit those corrective actions. And the goal is to get the compliance review closed out within 90 days of initial implementation of that review. So moving into 2022, if you see your county on that list in red, that transit system or those county commissioners are going to be subject to a compliance review, specifically in regard to the 5311 federal transit funds that they receive. The 2020 reviews are the ones that we just closed out about middle way through this year because those reviews got delayed because of COVID. But again, they're on a 4-year rotating basis. So if you see your county represented up there, you're probably going to be contacted either by the county commissioners or from our office to be part of that compliance review on some level. So annual technical reviews, we also try to get out to the systems on an annual basis for face-to-face communication. COVID put a damper on that, just like every industry. I mean, a lot of virtual meetings took place over the last couple of years. But starting in January, we're going to get back out to the systems and start meeting once again face-to-face with our systems. We usually use these technical reviews just to touch base with them, make sure that any findings identified on a prior compliance review, that system isn't falling back to old practices or old habits and once again becoming non-compliant. So one of the things that we take pride in, is, honestly, between the 3 project managers in our office over this program, is we love getting out and visiting our transit systems and having those face-to-face meetings with them. FTA has actually kind of given us a pat on the back multiple times about the communication and the manner by which we actually get out, put wheels of the road and get out and visit our transit system. So that's something we're pretty proud of. But again, the process is just to kind of touch base with them on an annual basis and help provide any technical assistance that they may have from year to year. And then FTA state management reviews. Federal Transit Administration comes in every 3 years. They review us as a state, how we manage the program, how we ensure compliance with the allocation of the federal funds that they provide. Our next compliance review with FTA is scheduled to occur in 2023. One of the things I wanted to highlight as far as when FTA comes in is they always identify 2 to 3 transit systems that's receiving these funds as a site that they want to visit during their state management reviews. Depending on the auditor, I know back in 2016 we spent, it was almost 5-6 hours at the transit agencies. It was 2 days worth of setting with the transit system, going over their information. The last state management review we had, we was at the transit systems for maybe an hour. So it just depends on the auditors that we have that come in from FTA. But if you're representing a county that gets identified as a site that FTA would like to visit, you will definitely be getting a phone call from our office, and we'll come in and work with you to get everything prepared accordingly to prepare for that review. We have a long history of successful state management reviews with FTA, so that's something we're pretty proud of. So getting into the contracts part of it, and I'm going to kind of have to rush through this because I've only got 10 minutes left. So the contracts and grants, honestly, if you're representing a county that's receiving these funds and in a pass-through agreement, this is what the funds are going to look like over the next 3 years. Okay? And I saw on the agenda where Ricky's going to talk about American Rescue Plan funds and CARES funds. Those are 2 sources of funding that our systems are receiving right now, on top of the other funds that they always historically receive as well. So I'm going to run through these slides pretty quick. You've got them as part of your binders there, so you can go back and reference it after the conference is over. If you got any questions, you can definitely contact me, and I'll kind of clarify. But over the next 3 years, I'm going to kind of skip ahead to the 2022 slide. When we get into January of next year, these are all the different sources of funds that the transit agencies are going to have available to them to be reimbursed. So if you're an auditor, again, representing a county that's in a pass-through agreement for these funds, At some point in time, you're going to see American Rescue Plan funds come through, CARES funds, 5311 funds, PMTF funds, and any local funds that's identified as part of those grants as well. So that kind of gives you an idea and a screenshot of what you can expect to see come through, again, if you're in a contract for those funds. 2023, again, our hope is once we get into 2023 that any remaining CARES funds that's left over, we'll be able to reimburse those funds, close that grant out, and then we'll get back into normal operating, and the funds that you'll see come through from that point on will just be their 5311 funds that they normally receive each and every year. So here's kind of a chart, shows what the systems are going to be seeking reimbursement for over the next 3 years. Just kind of leave that up there for a few seconds, kind of let you eyeball that, kind of take a look at it. But again, it's kind of a spaghetti bowl of federal sources of funds that our systems are going to be seeking reimbursement for. All right, the last part of it that I want to kind of hit up real quick, which was kind of the reason why I met with Lori and Ricky, and so glad I was able to be part of this conference today, is just to kind of give you guys a little bit of a heads up on what's coming. Again, if you're in a contract and have a pass-through agreement with these local nonprofits to provide rural transit and receive these funds. So pass-through agreements, there are federal requirements if your county is receiving these funds and have a pass-through agreement with these local nonprofits. And what we're seeing largely across the board, and this has been a problem that we've identified for some time now, is that there is a substantial lack of communication, coordination, partnerships among the county commissioners acting as the grant recipients and the local nonprofits who provide the transportation service and are subrecipients of the funds. Every time we go into a compliance review, I don't want to say every time, that's an extreme use of the word, but a large portion of the time when we go in and do compliance reviews and we start asking questions about the partnership and the coordination between the county commissioners and the transit system, there is a lacking of that partnership that we're seeing. And again, there is federal requirements spelled out in federal circulars, specifically 2 CFR 200, that identifies pass-through entity oversight responsibility to those subrecipients. And there's 4 kind of highlighted bullet points that we pulled out of that super circular that counties are responsible for in being a pass-through entity. You can see there, again, kind of running short on time, but those 4 bullet points that you can see there are the areas that we've highlighted that we want to start seeing an increase of oversight and responsibility being taken on the part of the county commissioners or the planning commissions that are also in those types of pass-through agreements. And I'm going to run through and kind of give you guys an idea of what we're looking for. So what we continue to identify, again, it's just a lack of, and the State Board of Accounts finding that comes up in regard to that is the internal controls. And again, I've seen on the agenda where I think Lori's going to cover internal controls in a little bit. Ricky, again, you guys get to hear a lot from Ricky this week. But she's going to cover internal controls and what that looks like. But that's whenever we search the clearinghouse for the State Board of Accounts audits, and we're trying to identify any findings that's specific to our program. When your county has a State Board of Accounts single audit conducted, about 99% of the time, it all goes back to internal controls or lack thereof. So that's what we have to start communicating to the county commissioners and those that are acting in that role to make sure that they understand what their responsibilities are to those funds. And one of the things that we're seeing a large part of the time is that the local transit agency, they're going to the county commissioner meetings on a quarterly basis to have their claims reviewed and approved by the county, which is required. But that's about the extent of the communication that we're seeing, those quarterly commissioner meetings, and they sign off on a claim, and that's about all we see. The oversight responsibility goes above and beyond that, and that's what we're going to try to work with the county commissioners to give them an understanding of what they need to do to increase their oversight. And you can see there on this slide, I mean, it was about 2 years ago, I had a call from a county commissioner, and he called our office to actually inquire about another part of the program. But at the very end of the conversation, he goes, "Hey, I got a real quick question for you." He said, "I keep hearing and see reference to this 5311 fund. What is that? And I was like, well, that's the fund that you're signing off on every quarter and approving reimbursement for the provision of public transit within your community, which we've actually had cases where county commissioners didn't even realize they had public transit in their community that they were funding. So that's why we're here today, to kind of give you guys a surface level introduction to what's required, and then you can help communicate that along to the county commissioners, help partner with us in that. So we don't expect county commissioners to be experts in federal requirements, but there has to be an increased working knowledge of those funds and what their responsibilities are. So moving forward, how we're kind of trying to address this, obviously we've been working with Ricky and Lori and State Board of Accounts to try to partner with them to see if there's processes that we can help, improve, tweak, eliminate any duplications on what we're doing between our two offices when it comes to the audits they conduct versus the compliance reviews that we conduct. And we're so thankful for the partnerships and the relationships that we're starting to build with Ricky and Lori and their team. Being able to present to you guys today is a start. And then at the end of November, I'm actually going to be standing in front of all the county commissioners, which is something I've been trying to do for the last 4 years. I'm trying to get on that agenda. So at the county commissioner annual conference, I'm going to be presenting this same information to them. So they have a, direct hearing of all this information coming straight from our office. So we just want to bring an awareness to the oversight responsibilities that they have. We don't want to intimidate them by any means, and just let them know that our office is here to help and provide any technical assistance that they need to make sure that they're meeting those oversight requirements. One of the things that we have developed and we've provided to the State Board of Accounts, and we're actually going to be disseminating this at the county commissioner meeting, we've actually developed an oversight monitoring tool that can be used by the county commissioners. And it's set up and divided in a way where it identifies specific requirements laid out in 2 CFR 200, where it's basically a checklist of, this is what we're required to do as pass-through entity, and here's when and how we confirmed compliance by the transit agency or the subrecipient of the funds. So we're going to disseminate this out to the county commissioners next month, and hopefully it'll be a great help to them to be able to provide that oversight that they need in relationship to the subrecipients. There was a slide where I kind of mentioned Fulton County. Is anybody in here from Fulton County, representing Fulton County? So Fulton County, we've been working really close with them, and I'm gonna start tying it up here in a second. I got 1 minute. So we've been working really close with Fulton County over the last 6 months. They had a transition in the agency director at the local transit system there. And the individual that took over that position was really, green, and needed a lot of technical assistance in order for just to come up to speed on the federal program. And in working with him, and based on their previous compliance review and some issues that we identified there, the county commissioners, the county auditor's office, the agency director at the transit system have really stepped up to the plate, and we've been so pleased to see their desire to really improve this area of their system and their program. So I just wanted to kind of mention that. But one of the things that they came up with, one of the requirements as a pass-through entity is that the county actually has to act in some way, shape, or form to provide training and technical assistance in regard to program matters to the subrecipient. And so what they actually developed was a training module for this new agency director to go through different trainings that was specific to the program, just as a manager of a nonprofit. So I kind of wanted to just share that with you guys to give you an idea of what they've stepped up to do. It was a great model, and we're pleased to see that. But I just wanted to kind of give kudos to Fulton County, and it's a good model to kind of emulate. So we're just thankful for how they've worked with our office in that. So I'm already over time, but the last few slides that I provided to you guys just kind of give some ideas of how the subrecipient and the grant applicant can work together to increase their communication with each other, to partner together to make sure that they're remaining compliant with the overwhelming federal requirements that come along with receiving any, $1 of federal funds. And as county auditors, you guys know that. So we just want to, in closing, I just want to let everybody know that as a state office, one of the things, as program manager, one of the things that I continually try to communicate and emphasize to our transit systems, we want to be the least intimidating state office that our transit systems work with and the counties work with. I don't know what your guys' perception is or what your relationship has been working with other state departments, but I know it's always kind of intimidating whenever you hear that, okay, now we're dealing with and we have to work with the state on this program. And we don't want any manager, any county commissioner, any county auditor, we don't want anybody losing sleep over making sure that you're remaining compliant with the program. Our office is here to provide technical assistance, and that's the way we approach it. We're not here to strong arm, recipients of these funds or intimidate, as a state. We want to be here to really work with you guys and have a good, healthy working relationship with the counties to make sure these requirements are being met. So with that, I'll close it out. And if you have any questions, you can contact myself or Amy or Mike at the contact information provided there in that slide. So feel free to email me or hit me up anytime about anything regarding the 5311 program. So thank you, Ricky.